Okay, we're continuing with this book here, The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers. We're going in alphabetical order. We're on the letter C with Albert Camus. Camus was a decent writer from France in the middle of the 1900s. He was born in Algeria, a French man. He was a very good-looking guy, real athletic. He was a total ladies' man. It was pretty routine in his middle ages and early adulthood. He would be famous for having 3 girlfriends at a time. He's born into a poor family, was a bright, talented guy, and it was kind of sad. His father died in World War I. His mother was deaf and illiterate, but a teacher was good to him and nurtured his academic skills. He sort of became an atheist, which I wasn't that impressive with him, because when you're an atheist, what you're saying is that life is meaningless. And I actually think his books were rather stupid. His real famous book was The Stranger. And I'm not even going to tell you what the story is. It's so stupid. It's so bad. It was like the modern art equivalent of a novel. Okay, I actually think he kind of stunk. He died at a young age, 46 years old, in an accident. So then you'd even say, well, why do I even have any quotes by him? Well, I sort of think that despite all these bad things about him, there was actually a good person underneath it all. And he did have a couple good quotes. Here's some good quotes by him. Every authentic work of art is a gift offered to the future. Fiction is a lie through which we tell the truth. Man is the only creature who refuses to be what he is. I would rather live my life as if there is a God and die to find out there isn't, than to live as if there isn't and die to find out that there was. Always go too far, because that's where you'll find the truth. The purpose of a writer is to keep civilization from destroying itself. Okay, now here's my favorite quote by Camus. When you have once seen the glow of happiness on the face of a beloved person, you know that a man can have no vocation but to awaken that light on the faces surrounding him. In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me lay an invincible summer, and that makes me happy. For it says that no matter how hard the world pushes against me, within me there's something stronger, something better, pushing right back. And I think that's an important point, because for everybody, the world sort of beats you down. It says, you suck, you don't belong, we don't like you, what you're doing is crap, you don't fit in, we don't want you. It's always kind of like hitting at you. And so you have to feel it inside, something good that's pushing you in a good direction. Christianity is good for that. God loves you, all men are equal in the eyes of God, life has meaning, I'm going to be part of the struggle in the world, for the support of good. All of those things help you. And I also think it really helps you, and a lot of people have said this, sort of analyze your life, realistically say, what are my options? What's the best I could do? And try for that. It's not going. You're not going to get everything you want. You're not going to win the lottery tomorrow and have everything the way you want. But you'll do the best you can with what you got. And it's, like I said, I like that Graham Weaver quote too. Suffering and pain is inevitable, but at least if you focus your time on good things, you make it worth it. Okay, so your life will be worth it. All right, a couple more quotes by Camus. Good intentions may do as much harm as malevolence if they lack understanding. And that's like the Hannah Arendt quote, most evil is banal. Most evil is committed by stupid people quite often who think they're doing something good. Like a lot of people caught up in all this modern leftism. Okay, look at these people in the public schools castrating children, drugging children with amphetamines, sick. Women caught up in feminism, bumping off their babies. Look at Stevie Nicks. I think she's just evil. I'll never listen to Fleetwood Mac again. Even though I like some of their songs. She bumped off 4 babies in a row. Okay, that's insane. 1 is bad enough, made a mistake. 2 is getting bad. 3 is really bad. 4, she has no kids, no husband. Each guy, once she bumped off their baby, the guy left her. Why wouldn't he? What does that say? It says she doesn't want your baby. Okay, continuing with Albert Camus. Charm is getting a yes answer even when you haven't clearly asked the question. Okay, Camus continues. The nobility of our calling as a writer will always be rooted in 2 commitments difficult to observe. The first is a refusal to lie about what we know, and the second is a resistance to oppression. Camus. Okay, you can put that in nutrition, or a refusal to sell out. If you really want to be good, that's what you have to do. That's what I want to do. I know I'll never make money. I'll never be accepted, but I could be the best, and that's something, just by telling the truth. and covering the stuff that's not popular because it needs to be covered, like toxicology. Albert Camus, without freedom, there is no art. Yeah, you got to have freedom of expression, or how can you create anything unique? Camus, there is not a single true work of art that has not in the end added to the inner freedom of each person who has known and loved it. After a certain age, every man is responsible for his face. Real generosity towards the future lies in giving all to the present. And now here's an interesting one. It is impossible to live without meaning. Yeah, if you don't have meaning in your life, what are you going to do? You don't have a rudder. You don't have a direction. You don't have a purpose. You're just going to be mediocre. You're going to sort of float in the water like a buoy, as Jose Ortega Gasset had said. Okay, Camus continues. An intellectual is someone whose mind watches itself. Okay, so Camus had a few good quotes. If he had been a Christian, he would have been much better as a writer and a person. Okay, Elias Canetti. So Canetti wrote a famous book called Crowds, and I read the book. It was kind of weird. He studied crowds for years, the observations of how people behave, and people behave much worse in a crowd. He studied a bunch of primitive populations, and he took notes on how brutal and bad they were. That's the other thing, too. The noble savage is a BS term. Savages tend to be savages, bad, okay? If you look at like the Mayans and stuff, they would have stacks and stacks of skulls all over the place. Cannibalism, all kinds of bad stuff. This whole idea of the noble savage is totally overrated. Savage literate populations usually are much worse than people give them credit for. Okay, Canetti has a few decent quotes. Explain nothing, put it there, say it, and leave. The self-explorer becomes the explorer of everything else. Yeah, if you start seriously asking simple questions and trying to answer them in reading, you will learn a lot. And self-knowledge is a big part of just general knowledge. That's been said by others. It leads you to good things to study that. Okay, Canetti continues. You draw closer to the truth by shutting yourself off from mankind, being alone to read and think. If you must answer questions, the most important thing is to show the questioner that you are his friend. When you write down your life, every page should continue something that no one has heard about. Speak as though it were the last sentence allowed you. The first effect of adjusting to other people is that one becomes boring. Yeah, that's another reason why smart people tend to be loners, is because that's the only time you're allowed to be yourself. I can tell you, when I'm around a lot of people, they constantly are telling me to shut up. Shut up, shut up, shut up. You can't say that. You can't say that. Shut up. And it's like, you don't let me talk, okay? A smart person's going to be more original because they have thought beyond the conventional patterns of thought. And I can tell you, like if I got in a car with my wife to go to one of her relatives, it would be, now don't say anything. These are simple people, and you start talking and you freak everybody out and nobody knows what you're talking about. And I'm like, all right, I'm not allowed to talk to anybody. Is there one person there at this party I could talk to? That gets boring for me real fast. Why should I go to a social event if I'm not allowed to talk? Canetti goes on. The most dangerous thing about technology is that it distracts humans from what they really are and from what they really need. Everything must be rethought. Well, that's kind of like once you enter a field, if you want to make a discovery, make sure the basic assumptions of it are correct. Quite often they are not. Here's a quote by Eddie Cantor. A wedding is a funeral where you smell your own flowers. Okay, that's a bad one. That reminds me of the Rodney Dangerfield quote. What's the difference between an arranged marriage versus marrying for love? With an arranged marriage, you can spend the rest of your life blaming your parents instead of yourself. Okay, Orson Scott Card will be the last one for our quotes today. He's a writer. He's a Mormon. Here's a nice quote by him about metaphors. Metaphors hold the most truth in the least space. Yeah, they're a very powerful way to communicate and remember something. In a way, being a Mormon prepares you to deal with science fiction because we live simultaneously in two very different cultures. The result is that we know what it's like to be strangers in a strange land. Yeah, and that's another thing, too. I've noticed, like, if you talk to people from Europe, they're a lot more with it than people from the USA typically about historical perspectives because they know their little country in Europe, they know the countries around their country in Europe, and then they know the USA, and they can have a more objective perspective because they know all of that. The typical person in the USA only knows the USA, doesn't know much history, and so it's hard for them to see out of their small conditioned view. Orson Scott Card continues, the better a man that you are, the more folks there are who resent you. The power to cause harm is the only power that matters, because if you can't, then you are always subject to those who can, and nothing and no one will ever save you. All right, so that was Orson Scott Card. Hope that was interesting.